This is a production by One and All Media. For more, head to oneandall.media.
Jesus is saying to them, do not be alarmed, these things must happen. Do not think that God has lost control. Do not think when you see the world falling apart in all kinds of different areas that somehow God is not large and in charge. In fact, God is using even these things in the story of redemption.
Today
with Jeff Vines, pastor, apologist, and Bible teacher.
Hey there, you're listening to Today with Jeff Vines. On this episode, we have another message from Pastor Jeff. It's part of the Marked for Life series. If you miss any, you can find all the messages in this series wherever you listen to your podcasts. Just search for Today with Jeff Vines. Let's begin today's message. Here's Pastor Jeff.
Turn in your Bibles, and I really do mean turn in your Bibles, to Matthew chapter 24. And for those of you who've been studying theology for a long time, you're probably thinking, what on earth is he thinking? Matthew 24, we're in a new series called Marked for Life. This is a very important series. You'll see why as we go through this. But I want you to have a look at a photo to get us started. Okay, there's going to be a photo on the screen. This is a photo of my family. Now, let me take you through this, and then we'll talk about why we're doing this. So you've got my wife on the far left, for those of you who've never seen her and think I'm not married. And that's my daughter that is in Kazakhstan, and then, of course, my daughter-in-law, and then you've got Ada, Layla, and Owen, and my son is to my left, and then my mother-in-law. The less said, the best. No, just kidding. And, of course, my father-in-law. Now, here's the thing. I want you to take a look. Okay, representing this, Charlie is the oldest, of course. He was born in 1939, okay? Layla, in Jessica's arms, is the youngest. She was born in 2022. And I did some math, and if she lives the average age of most women in America, she will live to the year 2021. Sorry, 2021. Wait a minute. See, every time I try to do math, I get in such big trouble. 2100, yeah, okay. The year 2100, man, stay away from math. Okay. The point I'm making is here is you've got about 150 years total represented in this photo. Now, think about this for a moment, because people say, I hear this all the time. Maybe you got it wrong. Maybe Jesus isn't coming back. It's been so long. It's been so long. Maybe you Christians messed up. Okay, do you know that family right there, if you take it back 13 times, you get to the time of Jesus. That's all. So they say that there are 77 generations from the beginning of the first peoples in Mesopotamia, so we're thinking Adam and Eve. 77 generations is all there has been from the time of Adam and Eve till now. And they say 25 generations, give or take a few, from the time of Christ till now. So it's not been that long. You think about the mind of God, how time works. You and I look at that, but that's just one family represented from grandpa to the youngest great-granddaughter. 13 times and you're back to Jesus. Not been that many people. We come to Matthew chapter 24. It is a difficult chapter because Jesus, his impending death is upon him. He knows that. And he's going to tell a few parables that are kind of like his last parables before the week of Passion. And these are kind of not like last words, but last thoughts. But before he does that, in Matthew chapter 24, his pastoral side takes over and he wants to comfort the disciples. But I want you to notice something. Man, this is so good. And there's so much to learn here. There's no way we can cover it all. I'm going to do the best I can in just a short amount of time. But you're the holy and righteous crowd. I know. You are tolerant, you are patient, and you are long-suffering. And so I want you to really get everything out of your mind. This is too valuable information. Get everything out of your mind and think about what Jesus is doing here. Because as a pastor to his disciples, I want you to notice he doesn't pat them on the shoulder and tell them everything's going to be okay. He tells them, get ready, it's going to be tough. The pastoral side of Jesus, it's going to be difficult. And when I try to contrast and compare that with so much of what I hear today, it's just so opposite. Now, yes, he's going to tell them eventually everything is going to be okay, but not before a long time of difficulty. So I want to read the passage to you, and I'm going to take you through it. And it's going to require that you really stay tuned, okay? That you're really involved. Don't fight the temptation to think about something else, because it builds. It's like I told you in geometry class. You know, if you go to geometry class in high school and you miss one day, you might as well quit the class, because every class builds on the next, and if you get behind, you cannot recover. Matthew 24. Here's what we're told. Verse 1, Jesus left the temple and was walking away when the disciples came up to him to call his attention to the buildings. Do you see all these things? He asked. Jesus says, truly I tell you, not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down. Now I want you to notice what happens. The disciples and Jesus walk out of the temple. They're talking about how amazing the temple is. If you think about, I mentioned Victoria Falls, an amazing, amazing seventh wonder of the world. 300,000 gallons of water pour over Victoria Falls every second. Not minute, every second. Out of the Zambezi down to the riverbed below. A couple years ago, I got to go to the Taj Mahal. It is an incredible structure there in India. They say there's 300 feet of marble on each side, serving as the foundation or the base. So 1,200 feet of marble alone, but it stands somewhere around, I think, 38, 39 feet high. It's not really that tall, but it is an amazing structure. But let me tell you something. The temple in Jesus' day covered 37 acres. 37 acres of structure, 138 feet high. It was an amazing structure. The disciples are taken back by it, and then Jesus says to them, I'm telling you, not one stone will be left unturned. Now, why does he do that? He's simply saying, everything you think in your life that cannot be destroyed eventually will be toppled. Everything you think in your life that cannot be destroyed because of how extravagant, gargantuan that it is, it will all be turned over. And then in verse 3, as Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. Tell us, they said, when will this happen? What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Now, here's why Matthew 24 is difficult. I think, now, during this message, there are a few times I'm going to say, this is my take on this. And if you might say, well, there are other people who disagree with you. And I'm going to say, that's okay. Okay, this isn't a test of faith at all. This is my understanding after my lifetime of research and trying to understand a difficult passage. I think, in my opinion, what we do is we inject our thoughts in the 21st century into Matthew 24. What I like to do is go back and ask the question, what would the disciples have been thinking when they asked this question? And the disciples in Matthew 24, they don't even get the resurrection yet. They don't get all this about Jesus dying for the sins of the world. They've got kind of an idea vaguely, but it's not really apparent to them until after the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. They didn't expect him to die on the cross and then rise again the third day. You with me? So when they ask Jesus, when will these things happen? They use a Greek word, centelia, which is a word that means when will these events be completed? And this is why this is so difficult, because Jesus seems to address 3 topics in one chapter. So I've expressed to you before that when you read the book of Revelation, you keep seeing these numbers, 42 months, 1260 days, 3.5 years, times time and half a time. And all of those represent the same amount of time, 3.5 years, 42 months, 1260 days. So in my take on Revelation, that some people would disagree, you've got 3.5 years between creation and Messiah, 3.5 years between Messiah and the end of the age. And all of history represents 7 years divided into 2 3.5 year sections, which is why the book of Revelation is trying to tell us the types of things that will happen in these times, or what we call the church age. However, the disciples, they're thinking of a messianic age. In the disciples' minds, when they say, what is the sign of your coming? They're waiting for Jesus to do what? Take power away from Rome and have earthly power, which Jesus has no interest in. I always like to point out to my friends that it's interesting that the Jews missed Jesus the first time because they were looking for a Messiah that ruled the earth, right? And they missed him. So in the disciples' mind, they're saying, when are you going to take control and power? They're talking about a messianic age, the time when Jesus rules the earth. Jesus answers some of the questions to do with the messianic age, but he also answers some of the questions related to the church age, and then he answers some of their questions about the end of the age, the culmination of all time. So the reason Matthew 24 is so difficult is you go back and forth, what's Jesus talking about? The Messianic age until 70 AD when Titus destroys the temple, or the church age until the second coming of Christ, or the end of age, the things that will happen just before Jesus returns. That's why it's so difficult. So, in verse 4, Jesus answers, watch out that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name claiming I am Messiah and will deceive many. Now, the one thing, this is an unfortunate translation because it's not really the word Messiah, it's the word for Christ. So, Jesus tells them, listen, during this time, whenever it is, times of difficulty that are coming, the events that I'm about to describe to you, during those events, I want you to be aware of something. That people are going to rise up and claim authority, not Messiah. They're not going to claim I'm the Messiah. Now that happens too, but that's not what Jesus is talking about here. There are going to be people stand up and say, we are the Christ, follow us. We have this special revelation and knowledge and you need to follow our word. Now, did you notice, don't get angry, did you notice how susceptible people were during COVID? Man, when people are terrified and scared, they look for somebody that will tell them something that they want to hear to make them feel better. And we were like sheep, man. We'll fall in line, man. If you tell us you got salvation and you're going to save us, you just tell us what to do and we'll do it without second thought. Jesus is saying, when these types of things start happening that I'm about to describe to you, I want you to be aware that there are going to be people claiming authority, that they have special revelation from me. Do not pay attention to them. Do not follow them. Verse 6, you will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. Now, the problem with this is I hear scholars, not scholars really, more of would-be theologians talk about how, well, we know the end is now because we've got wars and rumors of wars and we got volcanoes and earthquakes and famines. Folks, we've always had them. We've always had them. The Greeks, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, we've always had man fighting man. And somebody said, well, yeah, but the wars are more intense now. Well, it's only because we have more people and more land to fight over. We've always had wars. We've always had famines. You go all the way back to the Old Testament and Joseph. He actually ends up being used by God to save Israel because this famine that was in Egypt, there's a lot of people who died and a lot more would have died had God not sent Joseph to save the people of God so that the lineage of the Messiah could continue. And what about earthquakes? We're just now finding out that BC, before Christ, because of archaeological discoveries, there were earthquakes all the time, even before Jesus came on the scene. Earthquakes happen. By the way, just to make you feel good tonight, my father-in-law and I watched this series called 72 Dangerous Places to Live. And they talked about some place in Australia where they actually mine asbestos, or as they say, asbestos. Okay, and people actually live there, even though there are signs, don't live here. People live, well, I've always been here. This is my home. Yeah, but you're going to die. It talked about roads in places around the world that there's no room to pass, and if you make one mistake, you're dead because you fall down the mountain. It talked about people who live in places in India where you take a bath, defecate, drink in the same water. I mean, this, and people, they know this, but it's poisonous, but people grow up doing this. But guess what? Guess what one of the top most dangerous places to live in the world is? Los Angeles. Do you know we live on the San Andreas Fault? Did you know that? Do you know it's not a matter of if, but when? Did you know that I'm sure if and when it happens, not when, but when it happens, I'm sure there are going to be people cry out and say, God, why? And he's going to say, why did you live on the San Andreas Fault? You see what I'm saying? I mean, there's no cure for stupid. I can't help you. The point is, these things have been around forever. And he says they're going to continue. He says, but whatever you do, do not be alarmed. Now, why would they be alarmed? Because in the disciples' mind, they're thinking this. Well, when Messiah comes and takes his place, rightful place, earthquakes will be no more. There'll be no more pain, suffering. They did get that, but they don't understand that the kingdom of God has come now, but not yet in full. So he knows that when he leaves and these things continue, they're going to say, what gives? Jesus is saying to them, Do not be alarmed. These things must happen. Do not think that God has lost control. Do not think when you see the world falling apart in all kinds of different areas that somehow God is not large and in charge. In fact, God is using even these things in the story of redemption. Now, I want to stop here and give a pause because this is important to our everyday lives. Do you know the word tribulation? And some scholars believe there's this event called the Great Tribulation, but let's just stay on tribulation. The word translated tribulation goes back to that word thlipsis, which is a word for pressure. And I think this is amazing because the idea of pressure in the Bible is the idea of squeezing things. Remember what we said, squeezing things until the good stuff comes out. Or putting a person in tension or pressure in order to distinguish between the authentic and the imposter. Somehow in God's economy, the things that happen in the planet are supposed to show and identify the authentic believer who endures even in the face of that, and the one who's an imposter, whose faith in God is contingent upon things going according to their plan in their lives, and there's never any pain or suffering. That's a hard thing to really grapple with. Let me give you a passage that is one that I read in my 30s that when I started to understand, I began to, okay, this is the way God is going to run his universe. And it's in Romans 8. And let's start with verse 18 because we know that verse. I consider our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. That we get. But then he says, for creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. So he gives creation personhood. And he says, if creation was a person, it's waiting. Please reveal the children of God. Now, why? Why would the creation be waiting on the children of God? Verse 20, for the creation was subjected to frustration. It's the Greek word metaotis. And it's a word that means something was given a primary objective. Now it's unable to fulfill the primary objective. So now it's fulfilling the secondary objective. So the idea is, what is the objective of creation in the first place? There was supposed to be complete harmony between man and the created order. Sin entered, the fall occurred, and now creation is given a secondary objective. And you know what it is? To help you understand that if you place your faith and trust in anything in the created order, it's only a matter of time before something will come in and wash all your hopes and dreams away. So when you have an earthquake, when you have famine, when you have flood, it's supposed to open your eyes. Man, this world's passing. There's got to be something that's eternal, something that I can attach my life to that's going to give me hope and meaning. A kingdom, there's got to be a kingdom that is unshakable. And then he says in 21, that the creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope. God subjected it to this kind of thing, that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and glory of the children of God. So that when creation reveals what it really is, its futility, its inability to be what God originally designed it to be, it's supposed in that moment to separate the wheat and the chaff. It's supposed to reveal the real kingdom of God and the imposter. It's supposed to show us who's going to endure and have faith and trust in God even when the world's falling apart around us, and who's going to leave God or fall away. We'll get to that in a moment. Now notice in verse 8 what happens. All these are the beginning of birth pangs. In the Greek word here means the earliest twinges of birth pains. So we're not even to the contractions yet. You say, what do you know about that? I don't know anything about that. I'm just telling you what my wife told me. It's not fun. And so, now what's the point here? Jesus is trying to say, even when these things happen, there's still going to be a long delay. Even when you see wars and famines and floods, don't think for a moment that, it's going to be tomorrow. No, it's still going to happen for a very long time. In verse 9, he gives us not so much a sequential word, but word that represents the fullness of time. He says in verse 9, then you will be, then doesn't mean after the wars, famines, and earthquakes. In this text, then means during the age, during this entire age, whether it's Messianic, church age, until the end of the age. You, he said, will be handed over to be persecuted and put to death, and you will be hated by all nations because of me. So he's saying to the disciples, you need to understand something. There is going to be a policy of persecution in effect in the entire church age to one degree or another. Now we know that was true of Nero, the Emperor Domitian, the Emperor Hadrian. There was a policy of persecution that we must persecute the Christ followers. In the days of Jesus, especially after his ascension, when the Christ followers were more dominant in the Greco-Roman world, you weren't even allowed to go into the agora, the marketplace, and buy, sell, and trade unless you had worshiped the idols. Which means there was somewhat of a fulfillment of when Jesus tells us that the Christians in Revelation, or when the Apostle John is on the Isle of Patmos, he says they will not be able to buy and sell, remember, if they've not taken the mark of the beast. Even in the day of Christ, Christians could not buy and sell or enter in the agora because they did not have a certificate of worship of the pagan deities. So Jesus is saying this is going to be present throughout the entire church age. Now, in the early days, the Christians had two primary enemies that represented just about everybody. The Jews, because in the early days of the church, the Jews would turn or hand the Christians over to the authorities because they didn't like the Christians, because they believed the Christians were opposing the law of Moses, Judaism. And then the Gentiles didn't like the Christians because the Gentiles thought the Christians were atheists. They thought what's going on? You won't worship our gods. So when floods, famines, and earthquakes hit, they blamed the Christ followers. You're not praying to our gods. You're not paying homage to the pagan deities. Therefore, it must be you. You're the cause. So we're going to kill you, persecute you, or eradicate you. Now, what about today? Go all through the church. There's always been persecution of Christians. What about today? Are they persecuted today? Well, in the disciples' mind, and what Jesus is talking about here is the fact that there's always going to be a policy of persecution at some place in the world at all times. And even today, do you know that 300 million Christians are persecuted today? 1 in every 5 Asian Christians, 2 in every 5 African Christians face starvation, economic hardship, or isolation. They cannot buy and sell. It's absolutely insane. Let me go a soapbox just a minute. It has always amazed me of how insane even the American culture is when it comes to the Christ follower. Because there is a concerted effort, if you've come to terms with this yet, to alienate, marginalize the Christ follower. At the same time, there is this desire to give Islam total reign and freedom. Have you ever heard anybody say we shouldn't be Christophobic? No. But how many times have you heard, oh, you're Islamophobic, right? Now you think about what we're doing. We're going to take a religion that says you should never persecute any religion, Christianity. You should always be willing to have dialogue and love people who disagree with you, no matter what faith they're from. And we're trying to replace that with a religion that says, and I know this is going to make some people mad, you're trying to replace that with a religion that has no tolerance for Christians at any other Islamic nation or state around the world. Christians cannot survive in places where Islam is dominant in the world. They are told you can't build your church buildings within a certain distance of a mosque. They're not allowed to buy and sell. They are marginalized. So you want to replace Christianity in America with a faith system that ultimately is interested in the eradication of anything not Islam. Now, did I say that all Islamic people are like that? Did I say that all Muslims are? Of course not. I'm simply saying that this is asinine, it's ridiculous, and it will come back to bite you eventually. Now, listen, go out and love your Islamic neighbors, go out and love your Muslim friends, be careful. I'm simply saying that Christians are under significant persecution and primarily in Islamic nations. That's just a fact.
You've been listening to Today with Jeff Vines. Thanks for joining us. Next time, we'll bring you the rest of this message from Pastor Jeff.
Sometimes God says, man, you people just you're not listening to me. Go into all the world. You're just staying. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to uproot you and move you to other places in the world so I can get the gospel to other people in other nations. This is what I mean by saying you've got to let God be God and know that tough times may come, but you must endure.
You can listen to more messages like this. Just search for Today with Jeff Vines wherever you listen to podcasts.
You make me wanna dance and sing with every single breath I breathe. I will bring this offering.
Today.
Today with Jeff Vines.
This is a production by One and All Media. For more, head to oneandall.media.